Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome, everybody. It is September 19th. We are through week 2 of the NFL season, and this is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout week 4 and the rest of the 2023 fantasy football season. Week 3, actually, not week 4. I'm jumping ahead of a week, but that's okay. We're doing this live this week. We're going to try to do live once a week, basically, whether it's on a Monday or a Tuesday. I think all our episodes going forward will be live since we'll be recording them at night anyway. So if you're looking for fantasy content at night when we're recording, we'll be live for you to listen and enjoy and take in, and hopefully to help you crush your waiver wire, to crush your stardom sit-em, and to help you crush your lineup. So without further ado, I will introduce my co-host. That is Nick Cap. Nick, how are we doing today? How are we feeling after week 2?
Miserable.
You're the highest scorer in our league. You should not be miserable.
For fantasy, I feel great. Fantasy, the teams are looking good. It was a rough week overall, but in our league, I've been number 1 scorer week 1 and 2, so great start there. Across the rest of the board, 1-1, 2-0 in all the other leagues, so no complaints there. The complaint is with my beloved New York football team. And we have not.
It's nothing you're not used to. I mean, it's nothing you're not used to.
No, definitely used to.
Yep.
Quarterback struggles and
Zach Wilson, baby, he's your guy.
We haven't had a chance to talk about it on the pod at all.
We haven't.
Good thing it happened in week 1, and we're reviewing week 2, so we don't have to talk about it. So it's okay.
Well, we were going to do a show last Tuesday, and I was kind of busy. Nick was kind of busy. He had a late meeting. We weren't going to record at 10 at night, and Nick was like, I don't really want to talk about Aaron Rodgers, so we did not end up talking about Aaron Rodgers. So this is the first time that we're talking about that kind of talking about everything else. We'll get into everything that happened in week 2. We have, including Monday Night Football last night, obviously some injuries, some players really balled out, some players did not ball out. It's a lot of stuff to cover with that. We're going to start off the show with Waiver Wire week 3, talk about all the players that you may want to pick up tomorrow, whether you're in a fab league or whether you're in a reverse order of standings, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll talk about our Waiver Wire week 3, and then we'll give you a full breakdown from week 2, going game by game, talking injuries from each game, talking studs from each game, busts, a lot of stuff to cover from week 2. So before we do that, some quick plugs. If you're new to the show, thank you for watching live. If you're watching live, if you're watching a replay or listening on one of our podcasting platforms, thank you for checking out the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. We do the show normally once a week, sometimes twice a week, depending on me and Nick's schedules. If this is your first time tuning in, basically last year we did 5 shows a week plus a live show. I now got a new job. Nick has a baby on the way that could be born literally any day now, I think. Nick could get the call during the show. I thought that could actually happen. But so with our lives getting a bit more busy, we only have 1 show or sometimes 2 for you guys weekly, but we're still going to do the best we can to provide you some excellent fantasy coverage. You can find that show every week on all audio streaming platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Basically anywhere where you find a podcast, you can find us, the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. You can also listen and watch the show on our YouTube channel, PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. If you'd like to do that instead, we appreciate that and encourage you to do so. Go to that YouTube channel, smash that subscribe button, hit the little bell icon so you get notifications whenever we go live, whenever we give you guys a new video, anything like that. If you're watching a video, whether it's this one or any future one, drop a like on that video, drop a comment, share those links with your friends, and help grow the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. Connect with us on all social media channels, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram is PrimeTimeFFPod. Facebook and YouTube is PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. Twitter is the place to go on Sunday mornings. Me and Nick will still answer your start sit questions. Last year we did have the live show, and we had a lot of fun with that. But listen, with my job that I don't talk about on air, if you go to my personal Twitter, it's right there, actually right there. You could see where I work, and basically I'm working really late on Saturday nights, and then I have to be up on Sunday mornings for the NFL games. So I don't have the human capabilities to wake up at 7:30 and do a live show as much as I do enjoy it. Without being paid, I can't really make that happen. So we will still answer your sit questions on Twitter. We have a couple of you guys coming to us every week, and we appreciate that, and we'll continue to try to help you out through that. So let's get to our waiver wire week 3. Normally we do the waiver wire segment second, but we're going to do it first here. as it is a Tuesday night, and that is some hot news. So, Nick, let's do it this way. Let's go position by position. I have some guys that I have listed in our little notes doc, and basically we're trying to find players that are owned in 60% of leagues or lower. And I'm going off of ESPN for this list. So first off with quarterbacks, the first one I have listed here is Nick's guy, Baker Mayfield. He's only owned in 10.4% of leagues. He has 16 plus fantasy points in each of his first 2 games with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They started 2-0. They haven't faced the Panthers yet. Pretty crappy defense. So we'll have 2 more games against the Panthers for Baker. So, Nick, your thoughts about Baker through the first 2 weeks, and is he a guy that maybe you're eyeing if you need a quarterback?
Everybody knows I'm not a Baker guy, but listen, there's no denying he's been great for the first 2 weeks of football. Having said that, those 2 matchups were up against the Chicago Bears and the Minnesota Vikings, 2 teams that have 2 of the worst defenses in the league. Now he's going to go up against Philadelphia, and Philadelphia's back end isn't great, but that front 7 is a terror, and I think it's going to be a very rough game for guys like Rachaad White, and he's going to have to rely on his arm. They could fall down early, and the game script should be really good for Baker to play well. I don't know if he's my favorite waiver wire quarterback, but if you're in a 2 flex, super flex, 2 QB, any format like that, I think he's somebody that you need to have on your roster at this point. If you're in a single QB league, 10 quarterbacks, he's not starting, 12, probably not 14. He's probably at the fringe right there. So I definitely think he's worth having a roster spot in a division with Carolina and Atlanta, who do not have great secondaries either, and the NFC, which tends to be the weaker of the 2 conferences. Baker's going to have a lot of opportunity. He's got a lot of weapons there to keep performing week after week. So for right now, he belongs on your roster. I'm just not sure he's my number 1 QB target this week.
Here's another one for you. Do you know what division they face in the AFC?
I'm going to guess based off that they're playing the Texans.
They are playing the AFC South. So you have 4 games coming up over the next 16 or so. The Texans on November 5th. You have the Colts on November 26th. You have the Jags on Christmas Eve. And then you also have the Lions in there too. The Lions don't have a good defense. I'm just naming out some bad teams on the schedule.
Sure.
So I think he's worth a roster spot as well. Another quarterback I have listed here is Matthew Stafford. He's owned in only 29.5% of leagues. He has 15 plus fantasy points in back-to-back weeks. He does not have his number 1 receiving option in Cooper Kupp just yet. He's supposed to come off the IR week 5. So, Nick, how do you feel about Matt Stafford as a backup quarterback?
Another guy that's had a really good start to the year, and this is without Cooper Kupp. He's putting up very, very solid fantasy season so far. I know the position's been rough, but 14.5 and 16 points. So he's getting enough of a job done where he's worth rostering. And the running back position is such a question mark there, where Stafford really is going to have to be all reliable. And once Kupp gets back out there in more favorable matchups, he's going to be very, very heavily utilized and put up numbers. And they've had a very good start to the year. I think it's going to get worse. I think they're going to have to a lot more of those positive game scripts for your fantasy quarterback. But for me, there's another guy on the waivers that I'm really like after what I've seen the first 2 weeks, and he's still not my number 1 target of all of them.
So let's hear about that. Who is your number 1 quarterback target? Because he was not on the list that I had originally created.
It is let Russ cook, baby. I mean, Russell Wilson, the QB.
What's he owned in
so far? I don't know what percent of leagues, but I did hear. I was listening to another podcast on the way to my job and on the way back.
61.3, so it does kind of break our rules, but just in case he's on your waiver wire.
So we're saying, he's right there. He's available in enough leagues where it's worth grabbing him. And Denver now is going to Miami, and Miami they've been one of the hotter teams to start the season off, but on defense, they have not been great. That secondary does not look good. They're just getting a lot of pass rush, and they're going to get that against Russell Wilson
that O-line's
and that offensive line.
That O-line's really
great.
Bad.
They're going to get Mims out there a little bit more. He only played 5 snaps or ran 5 routes in that Broncos game, and he played very well. He had the 1 deep touchdown and another deep catch later on. They're going to give him more time, and they're going to be willing to air the ball out, which is what you're going to need to do to keep up with Miami in week 3. So I think Russell Wilson's going to have a great game script. He's coming off his best game as a Bronco with 27. Not his best game, but best fantasy performance. Maybe his second best outside of the Kansas City game last year. But He's had one of the hotter starts. Sean Payton. I don't think it's going to work as a team, but for fantasy and that offense, I think they're going to get a little bit better. And I think I'd rather play Russell Wilson than the other two guys we talked about.
For the team aspect, I do got to say, again, we try to keep it more fantasy centric, but from a team aspect, I don't think Russell Wilson's the problem over there, but he's not good enough to be the solution. He's not an elite quarterback anymore. I think he's in that mid range where there's a Kirk Cousins, where there's a, Daniel Jones or whatever insert name here you want to put. And I don't think there's enough talent around him to support that. The offensive line is terrible. Seattle somehow traded a really terrible offensive line tendencies to the Broncos. Jerry Jeudy's a phenomenal receiver, but Russ couldn't find him this, past weekend. And I just don't think there's enough other talent around him. And the defense is supposed to be the strong point. The defense gave up 35 plus to the Washington Commanders. So I don't think there's enough strong points around Russell Wilson for that team to actually succeed. And that's not a Russ problem or a Sean Payton problem. It's a talent problem. But anyway, let's move on to running backs. Probably the most interesting position, I'll say, for the waiver wire this week. So starting off here, Kyren Williams, he should be owned in your league, 60% at the moment. But if he's not owned, I think he has to be your number one target. He has 17 plus fantasy points in back-to-back games. Cam Akers is now on the trade block for the second straight season. I just don't think they like him over there. He needs a fresh start somewhere else. But it seems like Kyren Williams could be the guy. So are you kind of in agreement that Kyren Williams has to be the number one waiver target if he is available in your league?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. He played like 96% of snaps this past week. Like, that is absurd for the running back position. So Sean McVay is not only saying like we don't want Cam Akers, he's saying I think we have our guy at running back.
And he was effective. I think he was very effective.
Yeah,
I think he had like 60 rushing yards. He had 2 touchdowns total. He had like 40 receiving yards. I think he was very effective.
Exactly. He has the production to match it. So it's not like you're just saying, okay, here's like a running back going to an offense that's getting an opportunity. Like, this isn't like the Jerome Ford, and we'll get into him next. Like, Kyren Williams clearly is going to be the RB1. Unless if they try and get Jonathan Taylor, but this team, I don't think that's the move for them. I don't think that's the route that they're going to take.
I don't think so either.
So you're looking at a guy that's probably the starting running back for the rest of the season. He will be the waiver wire winner, or at least is most likely to, out of all the guys from the last 2 weeks on the waivers.
Yep. All right, moving on to the Browns running back situation. Nick Chubb got hurt last night on Monday Night Football. I forget exactly what he tore in his leg, but everything's it's bad. He's out for the season. It's very bad, and it sucks for fantasy players. It sucks for the NFL. It sucks for everything. So Jerome Ford, backup, only owned in 9.5% of leagues, had 27 fantasy points last night. He had 100 rushing yards. Stefanski came out today and said that he's a running back 1. Well, they don't have a running back 3, so now they're going out and getting somebody, and Kareem Hunt took a visit to the Browns, former Brown as well, owned at 5.9% of leagues. So, Nick, if you could only pick up one, which one are you prioritizing at the moment?
Between Ford and Hunt?
Yep.
I would go with Ford just because he's on the roster. He played very well last night when he took over. Having said that, by week 4, there is a chance Kareem Hunt is the starter.
I'm exactly there with you. We have the exact same opinion. It does worry me. I think I would still put Ford as my number one waiver claim over Hunt, but you're playing with fire here, and I think they're going to ride the hot hand.
I got one league where I think I got very, very lucky. I drafted 0 RB right off the bat. I went Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra, and T. Higgins. Those are my first 3 draft picks. At running back, I whiffed a little bit. Dameon Pierce fell to me. I took the pressure of taking him. He hasn't been good enough for fantasy. And then I ran out, what's his name? Khalil Herbert from the Bears also has not been that great. And my 2 bench running backs that I drafted because it was such a deep league were Kyren Williams and Jerome Ford. So next week, I am walking into what will probably be the number 1 team on the week just because of pure volume. You don't get running backs like that late. So I got very lucky there. But regardless of having them at that value, I think those 2 guys, they have the potential to be league winners. And, 2 running backs this early on in the season, if you went 0 RB, this is literally your grand slam chance to turn your year around.
Yeah. So moving on, I put Matt Breida here, and we'll talk about Saquon's injury later on in the show when we do kind of a recap. But basically, the report came out that Saquon just has a regular ankle sprain, and my co-host knows a lot about ankle sprains. I don't know anybody else that has gotten as many without. And Nick's played sports in his life, but correct me if I'm wrong. Most of your ankle sprains have not really come from sports, just kind of everyday life.
It's about 50-50 split.
50-50.
It's kind of like Austin Eckler's snap count, like 46%,
Gotcha.
something like that.
So Nick knows a lot about ankle sprains, but it's not Saquon's injury is not a high ankle sprain. So the original report is that due to the ankle sprain, probably would be out upwards to 3 weeks, 2 to 3. But now Brian Dable came out today, and today's Tuesday, and said he might play Thursday. He's not playing Thursdays. Let's get that
I'd be
idea out of our
shocked.
head. But he could play next week. So I did put Matt Breida on this list because he's owned at 1.3% of leagues, would be the starting running back for the Giants. And if Saquon does not play next week, you do have a starting running back. And let's say you're in a situation like yours truly, that drafted Jonathan Taylor, knowing he was out 4 weeks. I didn't know Taylor was out. And then went zero running back and kind of took David Montgomery. Well, now I need a running back to fill me in until Taylor comes back. Matt Breida could be the guy to fill you in for 2 weeks. So if you're later on the waiver claim, you need a guy for 1 to 2 weeks, he might be the guy. So what are your thoughts about that? The Giants have the 49ers Thursday. I hate that matchup. So if you're picking up Matt Breida, I wouldn't play him unless you have to. Then he has my Seahawks, and the Seahawks are not very good on defense. David Montgomery gobbled up, I think, 70 yards and a touchdown. So I would play him against the Seahawks on Monday Night Football if Saquon's not playing. So what are your thoughts on a Matt Breida claim this week?
I would not touch him. I don't want to put him out this week. I don't think he's talented enough. For me, the logic is there's 32 starting running backs in the NFL. That means 3 of them are going to finish as RB4s at worst, or at best. And Matt Breida does not have the talent to perform as an RB1 or 2. And as a flex option, I'd rather chase upside with a wide receiver. There is no upside in him playing the 49ers, who should win the entire game, and they should be playing from behind. He's not going to be a pass catcher and catch a lot of balls. That would be the only way he gets enough production to finish as an RB2. But listen, if you're absolutely desperate, you lost your J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, Nick Chubb, and need a play, and you can't get Kyron Williams or Jerome Ford, sure, maybe he's your plug and play guy, but I think there's more than enough running backs that you should have drafted to not need to play Matt Breida.
Well, unless you're me and just don't like running backs.
Yeah.
All right. Zach Moss is only owned in 30% of leagues. He had 20 points in week 2. The only game that he's played is he did miss week 1. What are your thoughts on picking up Zach Moss, maybe to fill a hole if you have Jonathan Taylor? He has the Ravens this week, and then he goes, then they have a bye. No, they don't have a bye. Yeah. So he has the Colts this week, and then he has the Rams the following week.
I think that Zach Moss is one of the least talented running backs in the NFL. I do not love the idea of playing him. If Anthony Richardson is out this week, you are still looking at Gardner Minshew, who is a mobile quarterback and does profile as a guy that is going to run out of the pocket versus checking down to the running back. Having said that, Zach Moss did have a very productive week against the Texans. Having said that, the Texans are not the Ravens. The Ravens
They're the Texans.
Have shut down Dameon Pierce and Joe Mixon in fantasy matchups. Zach Moss is nowhere near that talent level. Zach Moss wasn't good enough to be the running back in Buffalo. There's no reason for me to believe that he is going to be fantasy relevant enough to make your team. So again, like Matt Breida, I would let someone else take the shot on him. I'd rather not play Zach Moss unless if you need a 1 week play. If you have a great example would be you have Alvin Kamara coming off the suspension the following week. So if you need the 1 week fill the role because you lost Cam Akers or J.K. Dobbins, sure, but there's no way that I'm prioritizing him over any of the other running backs that we named.
Yep, that makes sense. All right, the Ravens' backfield is a mess. Gus Edwards is owned at 32% of leagues. He had 12 plus fantasy points this week, but he did have a touchdown in that. As for Justice Hill, he's owned in 30% of leagues. He has gotten the bulk of the touches in both games since Dobbins got hurt. However, he's only notched 8 and 12 fantasy points. So are you prioritizing either of these Ravens running backs, or are you just avoiding the whole situation?
I think Justice is worth the roster spot. I don't think Gus is good enough, but he should get enough goal line work, even though it seems like Hill was the guy that they went to in week 1. But between the two of them, it's the same thing I just said about these other running backs. There's going to have to be a starting running back who does not crack the top 20. roughly a third of the league is not going to crack the top 20 for running backs. And these guys feel like they're going to fall into that pit. So if you roster them, there's going to be one of two things that happens. You don't trust them enough to put them in your lineup and you'd rather flex a receiver with higher upside, or you're going to play them for what you think is a safe floor. And it feels like, between the two of them, they will have a good fantasy day. With Baltimore's rushing, it will be a good day. You just don't know which week is going to be the more productive. So for that reason alone, I'd rather pivot. It's like the saying, if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterback, right? If you have two running backs, you do not have a running back. You do not have your stud or a guy that you want to play in your fantasy team. So for me, I'm totally fine pivoting and taking one of the other necessary positions.
All right, now I have two deep dives. If you have a larger roster, Roshan Johnson is owned in 30% of leagues, and Tajay Spears on the Titans is owned in 13% of leagues. Do you like either of these two deep plays, or are you still a week or two out from wanting to roster them in most leagues?
I think Tajay Spears is the guy that I want to roster. Derrick Henry has had multiple week injuries for the last 2 seasons, and he's been very productive when Derrick Henry's healthy, but Tajay Spears seems to be the only running back that has taken significant timeshare from Derrick Henry. In week 1, he did not get a lot of carries. He only got a handful, even though he did have like 30 to 40% of the snap share, which was very high compared to what Derrick Henry usually has. In week 2, they did give him a few touches. So I'm not saying Tajay Spears is going to overtake Derrick Henry, but if there's a 3-week stretch where Derrick Henry has to miss, Tajay Spears is clearly going to be the guy for them. So I'm more than comfortable stashing him. In terms of Roshan Johnson, I see the talent. I think he's better than Khalil Herbert, but the Bears are not running the ball enough. They've only done 2 design runs for Justin Fields. They're trying to make him more of a passer. That is not his style of play. Again, you have to cater to the quarterback in the style. You have to run the ball more, and they're not doing it enough for me. So even though I think both are good stashes, I'd rather have Spears than Johnson at this point.
I would actually rather have Roshan Johnson. I think he's very talented. I think he'll be the running back 1 by the end of the season. And just looking at the next 5 games for the Bears, the Chiefs game is going to be a train wreck, so we're not looking at that one. But after that, Denver just allowed Brian Robinson to have a big game. Then they have the Commanders. I think the Commanders still stink, so I'm standing by that one. The Vikings, bottom 5 defense in the league at the moment. DeAndre Swift just ran all over them. The Raiders, James Cook had an awesome game against the Raiders. And then the Chargers, who are the Chargers. So, I think that the schedule is very favorable for the Bears running committee. We just don't know who's going to get the bulk of the carries, but I'll take a flyer on Roshan Johnson. If I have a later waiver and I could still grab him for somebody that I don't want on my team. Moving on to wide receivers, let's look at 2 Texans here. Nico Collins is owned in 62% of leagues. This week he had 14 plus fantasy points in each of the first 2 games. He's currently the wide receiver 6 on the season, clearly an outlier. He also has 9 plus targets in each game. Then we have rookie Tank Dell. He's only owned in 3.8% of leagues. He had 10 targets and 20 points this week. He's a rookie and could be more of a stash. Which one would you rather have if you're looking for either of them?
I'm going with Nico Collins. I think both are very solid and both are definitely worth the stash. Game script has been great and it should be all year for the Texans. CJ Stroud has looked a lot more talented than I think a lot of people thought he was going to coming into the league. This week, he just led the league in passing yards. And they're going to continue to pass the ball. So you're looking at a lot of opportunity and a lot of talent. And a guy that they spent high draft capital on. I think they spent a 2nd rounder on him just a year ago. And he's 6'4". He's fairly fast. He's a good athlete. Like checks a lot of boxes for what you want, like in your tight end for a rookie. Rookies always go to the tight end often. They got the size and sometimes athleticism. Like Nico Collins has that kind of build, and CJ Stroud's not shying away from him. And he's been the wide receiver 6 so far this year. I do not think he's finishing inside the top 10, but a top 20 finish is definitely within the books for him. And if he can manage to average, 12 to 15 points for a game for the rest of the season, that's a guy that has to be on your roster. And for a guy getting this kind of workload, that should be fairly easy to do if they could keep it up.
Yep, I'm right there with you. Next, we have Josh Reynolds, only owned in 4.7% of leagues. He has 6 plus targets in his first 2 games. He had 2 touchdowns week 2. Are you buying into Josh Reynolds being the second receiving option on the Lions?
I'm comfortable rostering him. I'm
just
still
not
not
starting
sure
him,
trust
though.
starting him. Yeah, like And the big problem for me is week 6 or 7, Jameson Williams is going to come back from the suspension, and they spent a very early first round pick on him, knowing that he was going to miss some time with injury. So they're not going to shy away from that. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to work his
Do
way
you know
into
who Jameson Williams is kind of reminding me of? He reminds me of Kadarius Toney 2.0. Talented, injury on top of injury. And I just
it's the
think bust
injury,
written
and then he
all
got
over him.
suspended for gambling, so he's only had the one injury.
Yeah, but I think he has bust written all over him.
No, for sure. But listen, if he comes in, and he takes 5 targets away
Sure.
from him. Like, that's a lot of workload, and they like the tight end. They're a team that is going to happily run the ball. They had 2 good running backs last year, especially Jamal Williams last year. So, for me, I'd roster him. I'd play him depending on the matchup. Week 3, they are going to host Atlanta, who does not have a great secondary. So that could be a good game
worth a
for
flex
him.
play in a deep league. If you're in a 12-man league, it's worth a flex play.
If you have the 2 flex spots, he probably flies in there. 1 flex spot, you can't tell me
Probably
that there's not 12 better flex plays.
So speaking of those Lions tight ends, Sam Laporta, rookie, is only owned in 49% of leagues. This is the only tight end I have on the list here. He has 5+ targets in each of his first 2 games. Do you think he could emerge over Josh Reynolds as the second receiving options on the Lions?
The upside's definitely there, and I think, they're slotting him in immediately.
And I think they're designing routes for him. I think they want to get him involved
they're
too.
plugging him right in for TJ Hawkinson, which I really love, and he's doing a good job for a rookie, but rookies tend not to perform overall well for fantasy. But listen, it's a position that you punt most of the time. If Laporte is there, I think he's worth a roster spot.
Deshaun says, "What's up? We are live. When we are live, you can come and talk. You could ask questions. You could chat fantasy with us, and we will look at the chat anytime we are live." All right, lastly, we have defensive streamers. The Kansas City Chiefs are only owned in 9.7% of leagues. They are versing the Bears this week. And the Chiefs defense has looked really good through the first 2 weeks. I don't think people have given enough credit to them.
Yeah.
Then we have the Patriots, who are owned in 57% of leagues, facing Knicks Jets. I wouldn't have wanted to play them against Aaron Rodgers, but Zach Wilson, this is the move every single week. The Ravens are owned in 51.9% of leagues. If Anthony Richardson is out, I do like that play.
Mm-hmm.
And the Titans are owned in 11% of leagues, and they are facing the Browns, who are without Tyler Conklin starting tackle, and now without Nick Chubb, and Deshaun Watson does not look like Deshaun Watson of 3 years ago. So how would you kind of rank these defenses, and is there another one that maybe I'm missing?
No, I think you got the top guys that I've been eyeing. I love the Kansas City play. The Bears have not been productive, and if they do decide to become productive, it's going to be on the ground. So you're looking at a game that's going to be low scoring on the Bears side. The Chiefs should go up early in this game. Good game script for them. And the Bears have not shown enough signs on offense for me to trust them and like them. Number 2, I do love the Patriots against the Jets. I'm a Jets fan. I'm not really allowed to say that, but last time Zach Wilson saw the Patriots, he threw 2 passing yards in the second half of the game. Like, that was the game where they decided that Zach Wilson needed to get benched for the rest of the year for Mike White and Joe Flacco and Chris Streveler. So, I mean, Belichick has owned the Jets, and it should be a very low under game. I'm going to check real quick what the over-under on the game is, because, I mean, that's got to be one of the lowest. I wouldn't be surprised if it was set under 40.
I think I would rank them Patriots, Chiefs, Ravens, and then Titans. I think that's how I would rank them. That's only if Anthony Richardson is out. If Anthony Richardson is in, I don't like the Ravens as much, because I think Richardson's electric. But that's how I would rank these defenses.
So the last time the Jets and the Patriots faced, it was the Zach Wilson retirement game, and it was a 10-3 Patriots ball game. So I do not see on this platform, but anyway, we know it's going to be a very low scoring game and clock management, and Zach Wilson is, not the answer.
All right. So some questions in the chat. Again, we have Brandon here says Cap stays with the fire advice. There you go. And then Deshaun asks, is it true Hunt is visiting the Browns? He is visiting, or did visit today. But yeah, he'll probably be a Brown by the end of the week, I think. All right, those are our top waiver targets for week 3. Make sure to set those waiver wires before 3 p.m. Eastern time tonight. We're now going to move on to the week 2 recap. We're going to go through every game, and we're going to give you your biggest fantasy takeaway from every game, break down any injuries that might have happened as well. So start off with Thursday night football. At least I thought we were starting with Thursday Night Football, but I actually didn't write that game down. I know I didn't write it down because there were no injuries in it. So Eagles at the Vikings. What is your biggest fantasy takeaway from this one?
I said before the game, Madison, this is not the matchup for him. And I think it kind of proved my point that Madison, he's a guy I wanted to lock into my RB2 all season long, but it was always going to be matchup dependent for him. This week, he's going up against the Chargers, and I love that matchup for him. He's going to get double-digit carries, no problem, and he's going to absolutely cook that team. The Chargers have one of the worst defenses in the league with a lot of talent. Me and Nick will always disagree on the Charger take, but 0-2 Vikings, 0-2 Chargers, that's going to be a big game, and they're going to need something to deliver, and Madison on the ground against those weak linebackers, there's no reason that Madison shouldn't have his best game of the year.
My biggest takeaway or I have two of them besides Madison was TJ Hawkinson was awesome. I think he has like 10 targets each of the first two games. He went 7 for 66, 2 touchdowns in this one. It's going to be awesome for the rest of the season. So I think he was worth that early tight end pick in round 4 or 5, wherever you took him. And DeAndre Swift with Rashad Penny, I think was a healthy scratch again. And Kenneth Gainwell was ruled out with, I forget his injury, but he went 175, 1 touchdown and 3 receptions. So I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be the featured back going forward. I know the Vikings are a pretty crappy defense, but the fact that he only got 2 carries in week 1 was pretty alarming. And I think you could calm yourself after that. Moving on, we have the Bills and the Raiders. So that's what we'll be starting with here. Injuries, the Raiders, Jacoby Myers missed the game with a concussion, no update for that. And Devontae Adams left the game being evaluated for a concussion, no update on that as of today. But what's your biggest fantasy takeaway from this one?
Josh Jacobs is getting a lot of hate right now. You got to keep in mind, he missed a ton of training camp because of this contract issue. Came back. Everybody thought he would be great immediately. Like it was
O-line's
not
also
going to happen.
bad. But the O-line's really bad. I mean,
Yeah, it's a bad O-line. Denver's front 7 is pretty good. He did not look great there. And Buffalo, the Jets cooked them, but they really do have a very good defense. A lot of people overreacted to the Bills in week 1 after that loss, but there was so much momentum for the Jets with all the hype and 9/11 and prime time, and there was too much momentum and emotion around that game to really take much from it. I think this is a lot more defining of these two teams. So I think Josh Jacobs is an easy buy low candidate right now. I think he's a guy you should go target. He's only going to get better as the season goes on. He was the RB1 or 2 last year, depending on the format of your scoring. So there's no reason not to expect him to bounce right back. And, 3 weeks later, after missing practically the entire preseason because of contract issues, bounce back.
So the other thing with Jacobs, he had 5 receptions for like 50 yards, which he wasn't doing last year, which is good. So my 2 takeaways here. Nick's guy, his arch nemesis, Devontae Adams, is still that dude. He had 6 for 84 and a tutty before the concussion. So like 20 fantasy points. He'll be fine with Jimmy G. And my bigger takeaway is James Cook. I kind of was screaming for him before, drafts happened, and he went 17 for 123, had 4 receptions for 36 points, over 15 fantasy points. One thing he didn't have was a touchdown. Touchdowns robbed from Damian Harris and Latavius Murray. Come on, like stop this nonsense. Like if this guy's your bell cow, reward your bell cow. It's like when you like. I was going to make a comparison, almost like owning a dog, but I probably shouldn't use that. Just reward the guy. Like he played really well for you. Reward him with the touchdown because that looks really good on his stats. And when he wants a new contract in 3 years, he wants to say he had a bunch of touchdowns. So reward him and reward those fantasy managers. James Cook looked awesome. And I think we finally have a running back 1 in Buffalo that we haven't had since LaShawn McCoy played for them. Moving on, I'm going between 2 documents. That's why I'm going back and forth. So our next game is going to be the Ravens and the Bengals. So big injury from this one is that Joe Burrow re-aggravated his calf. That's very bad. He probably should miss week 3. I think he has too much pride to miss week 3. I think he's going to tough through it. But this is an injury. Richard Sherman spoke about it on his podcast, and this is one that's going to linger. And that's going to worry me. I think until I see him put up one of those Joe Burrow performances, which is 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, I think I'm going to be worried about it.
So they're going to bring him back, and what is going to be a must-win game. They cannot afford to go down 0-3 in that extremely difficult division. Now, having lost to the Ravens, who have a
Well,
very
it's
good
two
shot.
division games. They're now 0-2 in the division, and that division is
Yeah,
going to beat each other up. But still, that's two division games.
yeah, that's not the start you want. And now he's going to go and host the Rams with Aaron Donald, and oh my God, this
Super Bowl
screams
rematch.
recipe for disaster. Like this
It's a
is
Monday Night
not
Football
going to
game.
be like this is either going to be all right. The Bengals are back, or this is going to be like red alert alarm.
Yep.
T Higgins on the trade block because they're not going to give him the contract he wants this offseason. Like I'm not saying they're blowing it up, obviously, but I mean there is going to be a ton of red flags.
Yep.
Like if they cannot pull off the win. But for your fantasy purposes, having said all that, I mean there's been too much inconsistency for the Bengals team. And I said it to Nick off the podcast. I am the Jamar Chase curse. I have hated on him for season 1. I hated on him for season 2, and I draft him for season 3, and he's been one of the probably the biggest healthy bust of the first round.
Probably, yeah.
Like going number 2 or number 3 overall in most drafts, maybe drops to 4 if RB goes early, but like he was set to be a lock to be a top 5 receiver with all the production he had. If he could just put together a healthy year, and oh my God, he's been awful. Like not just for fantasy purposes, he's had a couple drops and not going far down the field or not being the player that he was or as explosive. And week 1 was weather. Week 2, there was no excuse for him to be as poor as he was. So they're going to need to figure something out and do something. But this week is going to be
We're going to
very
figure out what kind of team this Bengals team really is. And I don't think it's hangover. I think that the injury to Burrow really does affect them, and they just don't. The routes don't look right. They just don't look right, and we'll see what happens. So, my other big takeaway is that Zay Flowers kind of looks like a week-to-week starter at this point in a flex spot. I think it's fair to say that 10 plus fantasy points back-to-back weeks, getting a bunch of targets. I know Mark Andrews stole a couple of those from him, but I think it's fair to say Zay Flowers is going to be a week-to-week flex play for most of your fantasy teams. Next up, Chiefs at the Jaguars. This game kind of went exactly how I thought it would, but no injuries from this one. What's your biggest fantasy takeaway?
the game went exactly how you thought it would. What was it, 17-9 the final score?
Yeah, it went exactly how I thought it would. I mean, the Jags didn't look good against the Chiefs. The Chiefs won by 10 points. The Chiefs wide receivers are bad. Kelsey was Kelsey. It went exactly how I thought it would.
No, this went the total opposite how I thought it would. I thought that the Chiefs defense would regress. It turns out that they have a top 5 defense in the league. And I thought Jacksonville would be better. And listen, people are giving them a lot of slack. Like they got for fantasy purposes, they were all like they had 3 different drives with potential.
There were 3 drives that could have been touchdowns on.
Exactly. So Trevor Lawrence, if he delivers on any of those, or Calvin Ridley doesn't step out, or there's a PI on one, like Trevor Lawrence is the QB 1 or 2 on the week. Calvin Ridley, no one's saying like, oh, it was a 1 week wonder. Like, no, he played phenomenal. Not for fantasy, but like he's a very talented receiver. The Christian Kirk finally like emerged after me and Nick, we didn't hit the panic button, but we were definitely concerned after week 1, not seeing him out on the field even. So listen, I don't want to take much away from it, because to me it was such an outlier game and so many close touchdowns where I don't want to take anything from it. It's just the Jags, they're going to bounce back. Week 3, they have a much easier matchup. I think they play the Texans. Like they're going to have no problem bouncing back.
So I was kind of pounding the desk about Christian Kirk during the offseason, and this is the Christian Kirk that I thought we would get. He had 11 receptions for 110 yards, 21 fantasy points, no touchdown, but that's okay. Yeah, I think he's going to be effective, and I think him and Ridley are going to be a dynamic duo over there. I saw some people drop Christian Kirk after week 1 for Zay Jones, and I'm like, that's just
a waste.
Not smart. So yeah, I mean, if you Christian Kirk and you are panicking, don't panic about him. I think he's going to perform to where his ADP was and maybe outperform it as well. Next game, Chargers at Titans. I literally wrote nothing here. So listen, I don't know what your biggest takeaway is, but to me, this game was exactly a lot of these games, and I'll say for a lot of these games, most of the week 2 games went exactly how I thought they would go. Derrick Henry was good. I think he had like 100 yards and a touchdown. The Chargers were the Chargers. Justin Herbert, my favorite stat sheet stuffer, had 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a loss, just like week 1. So kind of exactly how I thought it would go. Joshua Kelly got stuffed because the Titans front seven's very good. Always has been under Mike Vrabel. Keenan Allen was awesome. The Titans receivers and quarterback situation is exactly what I thought they were. So if you have another takeaway, I implore you to give it. But for me, this was just, I know who these teams are.
It's more football takes, but one comes from it. Like Kellen Moore and Justin Herbert, the start has not been as good as it needs to be because the one thing I will criticize Herbert for this year is he has such a big arm and he has such tall and talented and size-worthy receivers. Like between Everett and Mike Williams and Quentin Johnston, and Joshua Palmer, you have big athletic receivers and they're not pushing the ball down the field enough. And a large part of that is because they have like a bottom 3 ranked offensive line according to PFF.
The line is pretty bad.
So they don't have as much opportunity, and the Titans they always have a heavy hitting front seven and defense. So I'll give them a little slack for that, but they're going to go walk into Minnesota, and that team needs to put on a show against a terrible defense.
This is a loser leaves town game.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there were reports coming out that if Cousins loses and now they start the season 0-3 and they're not going to catch anyone else in that division, like they might trade him to go tank for Caleb Williams and Joe Douglas better be on the phone for that one because a 1-year rental of Kirk O'Chains, that is more than good with me. But they just got to figure out how to push the ball down the field. I think if they fix that O-line a little bit and give them more time, they will be able to. But right now, they have shown no signs of life on offense. I mean, Herbert has literally zero time to throw.
All right, we have Packers and Falcons. I actually did predict the Falcons winning this game. So for the Packers injuries, Christian Watson has missed the first 2 games with a hamstring injury, and Aaron Jones missed this game also with a hamstring injury. So your biggest takeaway fantasy-wise from this one?
The Falcons are winning in despite of Desmond Ridder. He has been good on the ground. Like he picks up a lot of these 3rd downs and 4th downs, and
he's a game manager. He doesn't really throw picks. Yeah, he's a game manager. It's what he does. He's a game manager.
He's gonna be very good in that conference. If he was in the AFC, no, it would suck.
You know what? Kirk Cousins would be awesome on the Falcons.
Oh yeah, for sure. I could see that. I mean, they got a ton of talent.
I don't think they would go trade for him because they're winning, but that would be an awesome quarterback for the Falcons.
I think the Falcons are going to have one of 2 things happen down the length of the season. A, they continue this rushing and barely winning, edging out games and gritty matchups, and don't need to worry about a QB change. Or they're going to get hot and then they're going to get really cold and we're pulling Desmond Ridder out for Taylor Heineke because the one thing you can say about Heineke, he might make some mistakes, but he's got a good arm. He's going to use those weapons. You saw Jahan Dotson and between Dotson, McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, the 2 running backs, Logan Thomas, all those guys got a good enough chunk of the fantasy pie for it to work out. And then you have Kyle Pitts, who is literally worth considering dropping off your fantasy team at this point because, it's been 3 years where he's only had 2 good fantasy games that have paid off his ADP.
He crushes every single metric and it's not there. The quarterback situation is not there. But Drake London, who we kind of were down on before the season, he had a good game, 6 for 67 and a touchdown. They finally started throwing to him. So good for him. I mean, I don't know where that continues, but if you did believe in Drake London, you have to be, ecstatic about that.
I think he hit his ceiling. I really thought watching that game, I was they were played from behind. They got a late win, late drive for touchdowns. And I mean, he got the 1 touchdown and I thought that was such an outlier for what he's going to get for the year. Like I said last year, the reason I didn't like Dameon Pierce, I know I drafted him in the league this year, but he dropped to me. The reason I didn't like him is because it was a struggle watching him try to get to that 10, 12, 14 point mark. You see the same exact thing with London, and it's nothing about the talent. It's all about Arthur Smith does not care about your fantasy team. He does not care.
Well, again, they're winning games. They're winning games with Desmond Ridder and running the ball. So until they start losing games, they're not going to care about it.
Exactly.
All right. Lions at Seahawks at Lions. This is the game I was able to focus on this week. It was a lot of fun to focus on it. For the Lions, biggest injury, obviously, David Montgomery with a bruised thigh, out 6 to 8 weeks. That is brutal, brutal, brutal for your fantasy team. Don't think you could really drop him because he is super talented. But when he comes back, it may not be his backfield anymore because Jamar Gibbs is there. So it's a bad injury. It's a bad injury if you drafted David Montgomery. So your biggest fantasy takeaway from this one?
You knew it was going to be a high scoring game. You knew you got to play your guys from both sides of the ball. The only big thing that gave me concern is when Monty went down, it was not Jahmyr Gibbs that just got the workload and the carries. And I do think it was smart of Dan Campbell not to just hand him the keys to the car. But at the same time, you used a lot of draft capital on a guy that looked phenomenal week one, and you did not give him the keys to the car when I think you should have. So I know they don't want to let him get injured and ruin his first season and like all that concern, but injuries happen.
This is why you drafted
him on the ground, let him play.
This is why you drafted him.
Yep, exactly. So I think there I forget who is it? Is Craig Reynolds? I want to say is
Craig Reynolds. Yep.
Like I'm not rostering him at all because I think Gibbs is way more talented and will earn that spot.
And if Craig Reynolds has a big week 3, I'm not going to overreact because
Sure.
Jahmyr Gibbs should have the bigger season. So, yeah, I could see Craig Reynolds having a big week 3 and then vanishing.
Yep, I agree.
So, for the Seahawks side of things, Tyler Lockett had a Tyler Lockett game, 8 for 59, 2 touchdowns. DK had a solid game. Kenneth Walker had a big game. And this is where my frustration comes with the Seattle front office. So, they draft Jackson Smith and Jigba. And I did like the draft pick, and I still do like the draft pick. And then they draft Zach Charbonnet. And I did not like the Charbonnet pick. And I'm not sure where either of these two guys really fit into this offense. And here's the other interesting part. Pete Carroll came out, I think, on Tuesday or whatever, the interview after the game, and said, I hope Lockett's Seahawk for life. I know his contract's up at the end of the year. I know that JSN was probably drafted to replace him. But if Tyler Lockett keeps up this pace, I don't see how you don't sign him back. I think he could be a Seahawk for life. So JSN and Quentin Johnson, both of them, I'm worried about their ceilings for this season. In keeper leagues, I think they're valuable. Dynasty leagues, I think they're valuable. In redraft leagues, I am worried about where their value is until there is an injury or something like that. And Charbonnet, I'm more worried about. And I'm too paranoid to drop him in the leagues that I drafted him in because I did drop Kenneth Walker too early last year, and then Rashad Penny, got injured. So again, I don't want to say you're banking on an injury, but I just don't see. I thought Charbonnet might be the goal line back and the third down back, and we just haven't seen it yet. Maybe it's because they're rookies and need a couple weeks to get going. Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't break out till the last 4 or 5 weeks of his rookie season, so it's okay. But just I want to note it basically.
To piggyback on that, there's 2 types of fantasy receivers really for rookies. For the guys that are really talented with the high draft capital, you get your Jamar Chase, who week 1 came out and said, oh, you remember how I said I can't see the ball when it's thrown to me? Yeah, no, I'm going to go finish the year as a top 10 receiver. Then you have your Garrett Wilson, who didn't break out till 5 or 6 weeks in and then put up top 10 season. And then you have your Justin Jefferson, who took week 3, put up a holy shit, that was a phenomenal game, and winded up cooking the rest of the year. And
hasn't looked back since. Has been the best receiver in the league since that day.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not willing to cut the string yet or say, I have to stash him till later on.
Either.
But 2 weeks in, it's not early enough to know. I think after week 4 or 5, that's when you can really say, all right, he's not going to break my lineup even on the bye weeks. I don't want to roster him.
I also didn't mention during the Chargers game that Eckler did miss with the ankle injury, and no update on that. So next game, Colts-Texans. Anthony Richardson had 2 rushing touchdowns before leaving the game with a concussion. That's very bad for fantasy teams and for the Colts because he has looked pretty electric through the first 2 weeks. But how about your biggest fantasy takeaway from this one?
I think that both of these quarterbacks have looked a lot better than I thought they were going to look. For fantasy purposes, Michael Pittman's a top 10 receiver on the season. I think he's number 10 right now. And he's a guy I've definitely overlooked this year. Then you look at the Texans receivers. Those are guys I was targeting later in the draft. Could not get them because they were just never on the board when it came to me. Or I would go 0 RB and needed to take your Tank Bigsby's and your Jalen Warrens instead. But both these guys, for rookies, have done a good job giving fantasy value to the players around them. So, and I know both of them have not had the most difficult matchups in week 1 and week 2. But both offenses have put up more than enough points where you can comfortably flex those guys, like all those Texans receivers. I don't want to spend too much time because we talked about it earlier. Michael Pittman, I do think, has a good shot to finish inside the top 20 at this point. Richardson running and not protecting himself does scare me over the course of the season, but he's looked electric, and every report out of campus said this dude's a leader and a bona fide stud. CJ Stroud just led the league in passing yards his second week in the year. That's phenomenal. So you're looking at two quarterbacks who you didn't think would give fantasy production early on, giving it early on. That for me says go target those guys. We did waiver wire earlier, so I don't want to harp on it, but go target those Texans receivers. Michael Pittman, a good maybe trade for candidate at this point. I think Jonathan Taylor, when he gets back, if he is actually healthy and not just, pretending to be healthy and does play for the Colts, could be a lot better than people thought in this scheme. So I'm excited to see the way the rest of their years go.
I echo all of Nick's points, and I think CJ Stroud could have a pretty big 2024. Not 2023 though. I think he could have a Trevor Lawrence kind of year in 2024, where Trevor really took a jump in his sophomore season. I don't think there's enough pieces for Stroud to really succeed in his rookie year, but if he could show enough flashes to where they just need to get those pieces around him, then I think he's going to really be successful. Moving on to the Bears at the Bucks, another game. Like I saw this one coming. The Bucks are one of my locks of the week, and they won. So your biggest takeaway from this one, I know what it's going to be, but take your victory lap.
My victory lap.
Your victory lap
on my guy Mike Evans, who
take your victory lap.
Who's been an absolute stud and is a wide receiver 4. And we said, "Oh, Mike Evans, always been a 1,000-yard receiver. Let me drop him to the 6th round." Yeah, no, absolutely stupid.
To be fair, me and Nick were both on this, and I wasn't as on it as Nick was because I just had like the cartoon where the love eyes pop out like Bugs Bunny or something. I had the love eyes for like George Pickens, who had a good game, who I can't wait to talk about, and Jahan Dotson and some other receivers around that range. But Nick was definitely leading the charge on this, but I was hammering the table and saying there's no way you could have both of these Bucks receivers after round 6, which both of those Bucks receivers have been very good and have probably already outperformed their round 6 or 7 ADP.
Well, my whole point on Evans was like there were two outcomes for him. A, he clicks with Baker Mayfield, who throws the ball deep down the field and actually does it well behind what is a very good offensive line in Tampa that Tom Brady built a year ago and 2 years ago. Or the Bucks are going to suck and he's going to get traded by week 7 to Kansas City or the Jets when I assume that they were going to have Aaron Rodgers. So my whole point about Evans was worst case scenario is 5 weeks he sucks before he's traded. So, but anyway, he's the number 4 receiver on the season. He just put up 29 points. He dropped a touchdown in week 1, which would have put him up to the wide receiver 2 on the entire season. Maybe the wide receiver 1 because it's really close up at the top. But he would easily be one of the best receivers, and there was no reason to doubt him. They always say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, he was never broke, Mike Evans, so there was no reason to let him drop that far in your draft. I'm very happy because I took him in both my keeper leagues, and the keeper round starts in the 6th round, and I took him in the 6th in both. And there is no reason why he wouldn't be my number 1 leader in that. So I am freaking pumped about him. I do want to make one more take, though, because I told everybody to draft Justin Fields, and he absolutely sucks. And they are absolutely
that's my take because he's not performing to his ADP. He's quarterback 16 right now behind Deshaun Watson, Baker, Sam Howell, and I have him in a league. Mac Jones, and I do have Fields in one league, and I'm like, I don't like this so far. But like I said, a couple minutes ago, the Bears' schedule is much easier after the Chiefs game.
Yep.
So that's going to make or break his season after the Chiefs game, those 5 games.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So 2 questions here we're going to answer. From Joe, should I be concerned about Alexander Madison going forward? I think this week's going to tell you a lot. In my opinion, the Chargers are a pretty bad run defense, just like Derrick Henry run all over them. I think this game will tell you a lot. If Madison has a good game, I'm not worried about him. If he has a bad game, I think I will be a bit worried about him.
Yeah, I mean, listen.
Week 1, he didn't look bad against the Bucks, and they have a good front seven.
Yeah, he put up 13 or 14, and he got in the end zone. Week 2, I told Joe word for word bench him, but he didn't want to listen to me.
Their O-line is really, really bad.
They're horrendous.
The offense is going to score, but here's the saving grace. The offense will score a lot of points. They're going to throw the ball a lot, and they're going to be in the red zone a lot. So there is saving grace for him. He's not on the Texans. He's not Dameon Pierce.
Yeah, and they're gonna play the Chargers, they're gonna get the Bears, they're gonna get the Lions
The
defense, they're
Lions
gonna get the
twice.
Packers, who have been good but not great. Like, they're gonna have a
I'm
lot
not
of
buying the
easier
Packers.
matchups in that
Not
conference.
buying the
Like,
Packers. The
so
Vikings schedule, they have the Chargers stink, Panthers stink, Chiefs are tough, Bears stink, 49ers tough, Packers are mid, I
mid.
guess. There's something. The Falcons stink. The Saints are pretty good. Broncos are, I don't know yet. Vikings, Bears again. So he has a favorable schedule. And then he has the Lions during the playoffs. So next question from Untamed Music. Just traded Mostert, Love, and Najee for Garrett Wilson, Fields, and Gainwell. Your thoughts? I don't love the 6 names that I'm even looking at, if I'm being honest with you. Nick's more of a Mostert guy than I am. I'm not in on Jordan Love.
He
I'm
must start.
I'm out on Najee right now. I love Garrett Wilson's talent. Don't love the quarterback play. If they could trade for Jameis, that'd be awesome. That'd be so awesome. I think Fields is a good trade for candidate if you believe in him. And Gainwell, I think, is kind of dead in the water. So I don't know. It's okay. I think he probably could have gotten a better deal. What are your thoughts on it? I think getting Garrett Wilson and Fields is a win if you believe in the talent.
I think you made the right move because for me, you traded Mostert off a high, you traded Love off a very high.
Yep.
Najee has sucked so far this season. Like I've been someone supporting Najee. I got to fall off that bandwagon very quickly. For Garrett Wilson, who to me is, I'm a Jets fan, but he's a very talented receiver. I don't know if I'm going to trust him on a week-to-week basis. He's definitely
trade
not
for Jameis. Trade for Jameis. Sign Carson Wentz. Do something.
He's not going to hit his ADP, but I mean, he's going to outperform every other player that you traded away. And my logic in fantasy is always you want to walk away with the best player in the trade. And for me, if I ranked all these guys rest of the season, Justin Fields would be the number 1 I'd want. Garrett Wilson would probably be the number 2. So
yep.
You walked away with that. You walked away with a win on your trade. So good for you.
From Craig Wayne, start Joshua Kelly or Jalen Warren 0.5 PPR. I'll go with Joshua Kelly facing the Vikings defense. Just allowed 130 yards to Swift with a tutty and a couple receptions. If Eckler's not playing, I think you have to play Joshua Kelly.
I agree. I'd go with Kelly. If Eckler's playing, I'd switch to Warren. They're going up against the Raiders this year and this week, and the Raiders just allowed James Cook to get 20 points. Warren's also looking to be the pass catcher, more explosive. I know that they're not as old as these guys, but the Steelers are really going to try and run that Ezekiel Elliott, Tony Pollard combination. Najee's going to be your Zeke, and Warren's going to be like your Pollard. So for that reason alone, he chases a lot more upside. We saw what they were able to do last year as a duo. So really comes down to Eckler in or Eckler out, because Kelly will get that snap share against a very favorable matchup.
All right. Thank you guys for the questions. Keep throwing them in every week when we go live for one of these shows. Next up, we have the Rams taking on the San Francisco 49ers. Cam Akers was inactive. Seems like a trade's incoming. I'm almost surprised he made the team this year. Why did they not trade him in the offseason or cut him? I don't know, but they just seem to have not liked him for the past year. That's all I really got on that. What was your biggest fantasy takeaway from this one?
Puka Nacua. I mean, where did this guy come from? I don't want to make any judgments on Matthew Stafford, but I am going to say he has some favorable targets and some not so favorable targets. We knew going into the year that Van Jefferson should be the wide receiver 1. Well, Cup was gone, and he is not. Puka has now set the record for most catches in your first 2 weeks of your career, the most targets in your first 2 weeks of your career. And there's only one big question mark. What is his role when Cooper Kupp comes back? Because I believe he just
I think his role
20 targets.
I mean, his target's going to go down, but I think that offense looks awesome. I think the Rams have been slept on this year. Offense going to be awesome. If Stafford's healthy, they're going to be a good team. It relies on Stafford. That's why they weren't a good team last year.
Yeah, I agree with that. And look, they lost to the San Fran, who McVay has never been able to beat Kyle Shanahan, it feels like. So whatever. I mean, listen, they competed in a game where I think all of us thought they were dead in the water. Last week, everybody said that the Seahawks should blow out the Rams that week.
I didn't.
Nope. Rams absolutely.
I had the Rams winning that game.
Curb stomped Geno Smith. So look, you got a lot of fantasy value on a team that just a few years ago was in the Super Bowl, won the Super Bowl. And the team's only going to get better when Cup gets back. Like, they're not going to get worse. The only question is, who are those fantasy receivers that are going to still be productive? And for me, Atwell and Nakua are the two guys that are really worth keeping on your roster, even when they return.
So my big takeaway is that once again, only two 49ers skill position players will go off for you. I think CMC's a lock almost every week, and then you're rolling the dice with Debo, Kittle, and Ayuk, and Kittle's going to be the odds on loser just about every other week, which worries me as a Kittle owner in Dynasty. I kind of knew that going into the season, and it kind of sucks, but Debo had a big week. So if you're a Debo owner, again, it just, it's only so much talent that could go around on that offense. That's why I didn't like the McCaffrey trade overall last year. I'm also a Seahawks fan, so I'm not biased at all. Craig says Fields or Cousins this week. I'll go with Cousins for sure. Kirk had an awesome game against a really good Eagles defense. I think he had like 350 yards and like 3 touchdowns. Now facing the Chargers defense, who is bad. Should be a shootout. I think this will be the shootout of the week that everybody predicts, so maybe it won't be a shootout, but I don't want Fields against that Chiefs defense.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of Fields going up against Nick Bolton. The only thing I will say is, if you need the safe floor, it is going to be Justin Fields, because he's still going to get those rushing attempts. As bad as he has been rushing the ball and giving you those double-digit marks. If you need to chase all that upside, then you need Kirk Cousins, because, I mean, there is no ceiling for him in this matchup. He should easily be able – not easily, but 30 points is within the range of outcomes for him. I'm not sure if Justin Fields can do that with this offense and with that scheme.
Yep. Moving on, the Giants at the Cardinals. I mean, I predicted the Giants winning, but not in that ridiculous comeback fashion. So we already did kind of speak about Saquon Barkley, but I'll mention it again. He injured his ankle. It's not a high ankle sprain, just a regular ankle sprain. He could be injured up to 3 weeks, but it seems like it's going to be kind of a week-to-week decision. So what's your biggest takeaway from this one?
Those Cardinals skill position players are going to remain fantasy relevant, I think, for the entirety of the season.
I think so too.
Marquise Brown has been very solid the first 2 weeks. James Conner, I think you have to trade for. He's getting so much passing
You may not
down
be able
work.
to. You may have missed your opportunity. I
Yeah,
wouldn't trade him.
he's been really solid, really consistent, putting up a high floor, and I don't think any people thought that was going to happen. You got to keep in mind, just 2 years ago, James Conner finished in the top 10 as a running back. When he was with the Steelers, when he had a healthy year, he finished in the top 10. So a guy that has shown he's talented is now getting passing down work, and he's proving he has a safe floor. Those two guys are going to be very relevant for fantasy. And if you have the chance to trade for them, and you have a guy like a Garrett Wilson where you're not trusting every week him and Zach Wilson, like, Garrett's probably going to have a lot of weeks with less than 70 receiving yards than over 70 receiving yards. As sad as that is to say, Marquise Brown and James Conner, both those guys are going to get a lot of passing down work from the Cardinals, who more often than not are going to be playing down from behind. Like, they got off early and they still were very productive. So for me, like, I think those two guys are very worth the targeting and the trading, and could have a lot more fantasy value down the line than people expect.
For me, it's Darren Waller was the guy that you drafted. He 6 receptions for 76 yards, so only 13.6 fantasy points, but that's not bad for your tight end at all. And he had 8 targets, so he led the team in targets, and I think that's what we're going to get for most of the season. The injury didn't bother him. I think he has a hammy or something. It didn't bother him. So, yeah, I mean, you got the guy that you drafted, I think, and I think he has a ton of upside going forward for those Giants. Not Thursday. The 49ers game is going to be pretty bad. But then he has upside after that. Next up, we got Knicks Jets against the Dallas Cowboys. Your biggest fantasy takeaway from this one, because the game went exactly how I kind of expected it to, besides the fact that Breece Hall just did not get fed at all.
Yeah, they're going to address that this week. Like, they're going to run the ball. They're playing New England.
I think so too.
There is no Jet you can comfortably start, period. That includes Garrett Wilson. If he did not break off that 70-yard touchdown, like, he had a miserable fantasy day. I don't know what else to say about the Jets. I mean, I love them going into the year. I loved all their fantasy players. I don't think there's a single one you could comfortably start. That includes Garrett Wilson, as sad as that is to say, for the offensive rookie of the year. I do think that they are going to be more open to looking for quarterback after seeing how bad Zach did perform. 3 interceptions against the Cowboys, who we knew were going to force turnovers, but Zach looked rattled. He could not create his own play. That offensive line is miserable. It's going to be a rough fantasy year for everybody that drafted those Jets players. Like, there is no alternative unless they go and get the Jameis Winston, who will give you the fantasy points, or manage to get Kirk if they say, screw it, we want Caleb or Shadore or any of those other. I mean, it's an elite quarterback class. There's no reason not to. But yeah, that's it.
Commanders at the Broncos. Your biggest takeaway from this one?
The Broncos stink. I mean, like, they did all of this hype up for Sean Payton, traded draft capital for a coach. That's crazy.
The thing is, Sean Payton doesn't look bad. The roster is bad. He adopted a bad roster.
No.
Much.
You cannot allow 35 points to the commies. I don't want
to
hear it.
You're right about that. The defense is supposed to be the strength, and it was not the strength.
Whatever you want to say about Nathaniel Hackett, and trust me, as a Jets fan that has now watched him and his terrible decision making to put the ball on the ground and trust Zach to throw a little bit, there is no reason that defense should not have shut down that team. I mean, the Broncos have a very good roster. Outside of offensive line, they have enough pass catchers. I know Judy's first week back. Cortland Sutton is a solid receiver.
Judy was back this week. I mean, I
didn't see it, but
I didn't see him either. I mean, I saw. I saw the red zone and I saw receivers in the end zone, but I didn't see it being Jerry Judy.
And the receiver that Russ seems to trust, Marvin Mims, for some reason only ran 5 routes. That's a coaching decision. I don't want to hear it. The defense last year, I thought the stat was if the Broncos scored 20 points in every game last year, they finished this season with like 14 wins. So you can't even tell, like, somehow this team got worse. Russell Wilson, I will say this.
Well, the defense got worse. The offense seems a little bit improved, but the line is horrible. The line, I know we said that for a couple teams. I know we said that for a couple teams to show, and I think the defenses and the line specifically in the NFL are so much higher of a talent level right now than offensive lines. It's not even close.
Yes.
There's maybe 2 or 3 offensive lines out there that are solid, and guess what? The 3 teams that were in the championship games last year, the Eagles, the Niners, and the Chiefs, those are the 3 with probably the 3 best lines in the league, and there's a reason for it. But it's like you either have a top 3 or 4 line, or you're here. You're just bad. You're downright bad, and that's the end of it. Because almost every team has a stud defensive lineman that is eating your line alive, and the Broncos are suffering from it, like the Vikings and the Chargers. And the Seahawks, even though the rookie tackles played very, very well this week, and didn't allow a sack. But a lot of these teams, the lines are just pretty bad.
And next week, they're going to go up against the Dolphins. And that Dolphins offense is freaking electric. They're going to toast that Swiss cheese secondary.
And the Dolphins front 7 looks good, I think. So
yeah, the Dolphins defense has been pretty solid. They're definitely going to be better than the Commanders. So I think Denver's walking into an 0-3 start. And I'm really hoping it's an 0-5 start because I need my Jets to beat them. Like that's my Super Bowl this year at this point. So, but anyway, I mean, listen, the Broncos, they're not recover. They are not going to recover. If they didn't get that Hail Mary, keep in mind, it was a Hail Mary they gave Russell Wilson a top 5 week.
Sean Payton should trade Russell Wilson to your Jets.
No.
Yes.
No, I'm not putting that contract.
Yes, he should. Yes, he should. He should.
I will transfer. I will be a part of the trade for fandom, and then I hope the Broncos cut me so I could go find another team to root for if Russell Wilson's my quarterback.
I don't think Sean Payton wants Russell Wilson.
No, I don't think so either.
My 2 takeaways: Jahan Dotson looks he's underperforming so far, and me and Nick were pretty high on him, and that does suck. And my other one is that Brian Robinson's ADP was at round 10, right near Antonio Gibson, and he's clearly the running back 1. So if you gambled on Gibson like I did in a league, sucks to be you. And if you drafted Brian Robinson, good to be you. 87 yards, 2 touchdowns. Sunday Night Football, Dolphins Patriots. I have one minor note, but again, this is another game that went exactly how I thought it would. It was close. It was the Dolphins were the better team because they're more talented, and that's all I got.
The Dolphins have one of the most electric offenses in the league. They can win on the ground. They can win in the air. Tua has had Bill Belichick's number. I believe he's 5-0 against Belichick, which is it's a remarkable.
Bill Belichick has Tyreek Hill's number. I know he had a touchdown, but Tyreek Hill was kind of shut down, sort of.
Tua is the only quarterback to go 5-0 against Belichick or have 5 consecutive wins against Belichick. Like it is a remarkable feat of his very young career, and Tua deserves a lot of love for a guy. And listen, I don't love the Dolphins. I hate them. They're the one team.
I love the Dolphins.
I had no problem with people saying the Bills would win the division and then the Jets too. It really pissed me off when people would say the Dolphins were going to be better than the Jets. And
you have no reason
obviously
to.
The
Dolphins don't do anything to you.
They stole Tyreek Hill from me. I wanted Bradley Chubb when he was getting traded. And
that's your front office's fault.
They stole Mike White, who would be my starting quarterback right now. Braxton Berrios, my all-pro return man, even though Gibson looks great. Like, the Dolphins have just stole too much love of my Jets away from me. Vic Fangio was a guy that the Jets were targeting at DC this year. So, they're just stealing everybody that I love. That's really why I don't like the Dolphins. But yeah.
Also, another note, Jalen Waddle did suffer a concussion in the fourth quarter. No update on that. Monday Night Football. Man, the quarterback play in these 2 games. Wow. So first off, Saints-Panthers. For the Saints, Jamal Williams has a hamstring injury. He's going to be out a couple weeks. I'm not picking up Tony Jones. I didn't have him in the waiver wire segment. I'm not picking him up for a week. Kamara's back next week. That's kind of my thoughts on that situation.
Yeah, hopefully Kendre Miller can get out there for the next week because he was getting a lot of rookie hype and love, and the Saints spent a good draft capital on him, and he was injured going into the draft. And if you're injured in a running back, typically you do not get drafted early. So for him to go at his value was already a surprise. And now they go up against Green Bay, and Green Bay, I know Bijan Robinson, to me, looks like the best running back in the NFL at the moment. But they just allowed a lot of rushing yards to them. So, you're looking at a good amount of upside from Kendre Miller if he could get the start going into week 3. It sucks for Jamal Williams because he got 9 carries very early on in that game before the injury. So, and they were not efficient at all, but he was clearly on pace to get a 25 rushing attempt game in what could have been very solid. I had him running in one league and Michael Thomas in that same league, and unfortunately, but Michael Thomas has been very solid for fantasy so far.
Him and Olave have been solid. My 2 takeaways from this game is Derek Carr's terrible. I think he's somehow regressed going to the Saints. He looks terrible. I didn't want to say it the first week one outlier, but Panthers defense is not good. He should have had 300 passing yards and a couple tutties. Terrible. He's terrible. I'm sticking by that. He's not even in my mid category in quarterbacks anymore. He's terrible. Jimmy G may have been an upgrade over him. And lastly, there's no Panther worth playing. Adam Thielen had a solid game, a touchdown, 5 receptions, 60 yards. Miles Sanders doesn't look good. The Panthers are going to have a top 3 pick again next year, or maybe
they're not.
The Bears. I forget. They're trading to the Bears, right?
Yep.
Ugh. So the Bears
are going to take a quarterback. They're getting rid of Fields. There's no way.
No. I can't have Caleb Williams going there. I'm a USC guy.
You can have him go. Send him out to the NFC. Send him out to the NFC.
Yeah. So I don't know if you have any other fantasy takeaways from this game because I don't. Steelers Browns. So for the Steelers, Deontay Johnson got placed on the IR, going to miss 4 games with a hamstring injury, and we already spoke about Nick Chubb being out for the season. What's your biggest fantasy takeaway from Steelers Browns? A magnificent football game to watch.
I mean, there's just not a lot of talent on either of these teams on the offensive side of the ball.
They're supposed to have talent.
I don't see it on my fantasy team. George Pickens had the electric touchdown.
Pickens is electric. 4 receptions for 127 yards. Obviously, 70 of it did come from that touchdown, but he had 10 targets. So that's very welcoming. Najee Harris, I saw a tweet. Najee Harris is trying for -1 yards every carry. He looked bad. And that's really all I got.
I mean, listen, he's been horrendous. I do have one more fun stat to share because I didn't share Nick's fun stat of the day on this episode. And we do got to rewind a couple games if you don't mind, Nick. The Texans, our beloved Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce this week had 31 rushing yards. Do you want to know how many yards he had after contact?
Probably -1 or something like that.
No. He had 38 yards after contact. So Yeah, for some reason, he got more yards after contact than he got yards in the game. So I know we didn't talk about this as a Texans takeaway, but Dameon Pierce, who I think is a very talented running back, like he's getting hit behind the line, and for some reason, it's a very good pass blocking offensive line. I did see that 4 of the 5 Texans offensive linemen are hurt. So the fact that they were able to stay up for those receivers should be very good going forward. But Dameon Pierce, hopefully we can fix that.
Yeah, I don't have much hope for that one. All right, so we got a question from Nick here, who's a Jags fan. Start 3, half PPR. AJ Brown. So we're AJ Brown, Lamb, Ridley, or Puka. Never thought this could be a question, but here we are. So AJ Brown and Lamb, I don't care. They're locked to your lineup every week, and I still think you're locking in Calvin Ridley just about every week. So that's kind of where I'm going from there. I know Puka's been really good, but I think it's really, really tough to sit Calvin Ridley and his talent. Who are the Jags against? Let's see.
The Texans.
Yeah, you still got to play those 3 guys. I know Puka's the hot flavor of the month, but I think you're still playing your 3 studs. You have a flex spot. Like, is there another flex spot you can put Puka in? Because that'd be nice, but I just can't sit AJ Brown or CD and Ridley as well.
I would honestly say of all of them, based on their performances, AJ Brown would be the most comfortable.
But here's the thing: he's going to go out there and have 100 yards and 3 touchdowns this week. You know you're going to feed him one of these weeks.
He's getting 11 days rest. He's going from Thursday Night Football to Monday Night Football. So, like, I don't know how you don't play him with that. Like, you can't bench your first round pick or second round pick.
But the Bucs secondary is nothing special.
Listen, you got to take it on the chin no matter what Puka does in week 3 on your bench. Like,
yep.
I'm sorry, your team's too talented. If I were you, I would trade Puka away right now.
Yeah, this is the time to trade him away.
Or package him with Ridley and go get, like, I don't know, one of those other Stephon Diggs. Like, go target one of those guys.
Yep. Alrighty, guys, if you're watching live and have any other questions, we'll happily answer them. But if not, we're going to skedaddle out of here. So thank you for watching this episode, whether you're watching live or whether you're watching or listening to the replay. We appreciate that. Hopefully help with your waiver claims and gave you some helpful insights on week 2 that could help you for week 3 and going forward. If you enjoyed this episode and you're watching on YouTube, whether it's live or the replay, make sure to drop a like on this video. We appreciate that. Hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel and the little bell icon. So anytime we go live or drop a video, you get a notification. You can find the show every single week on audio streaming platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and Anchor. If you're on iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. We really would appreciate that. Aside from that, keep checking in on social media with us. We can answer all of your start sit questions on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, PrimeTimeFFPod, Facebook, and YouTube is Primetime Fantasy Podcast. That is all we got for you guys for this week. Best of luck in week 3, and we'll talk to you guys after week 3 to get you ready for week 4.